guys, this is part 2 of identifying different insects, and today we're going to be covering all the insects with incomplete metamorphosis. And incomplete metamorphosis just means that they don't go into a pupa to reach adulthood. Here's the outline, and just like every other outline and every other outline that will follow, you can go over there and click. I'm just going to do the major groupings because, again, I'll get these like 700 annotations in my YouTube folder, but you can go to the description, and if you want to jump to any of the specific orders, you can just click on them in the description, and they'll be all right there. We're going to be covering the groups in Plecoptera, which is a grouping we'll talk about in just a second, but we'll be covering mayflies, dragonflies, and damselflies, and then we're going to move on to Neoptera, and we're going to talk about stoneflies, stick insects, mantises, cockroaches, termites, earwigs, katydids, crickets, and grasshoppers, lice, thrips, and your bugs and plant hoppers. So this video is the start of Pterygota, and the next video will be the end of Pterygota, and that's just because Pterygota is the rest of the insects. It's all the winged insects from here on out. And Pterygota in Greek just means winged, and their characteristics are that they have wings. Although some insects don't, like your lice and your fleas, and that's just because they used to have wings a long time ago, but they have lost their wings over evolutionary time because of their lifestyle. So within Pterygota, there are these two natural groupings. There's this first one, which is Plecoptera, which just means old wing, and that's because the insects can't fold their wings over their back. It's kind of like a toxic waste dump area for taxonomy, because anything that can't fold its wings over its back just gets dumped in this group, whether it belongs there or not. And so it needs some resolution, and there's some debate right now happening if whether or not it's actually a monophyletic group or not. It's probably paraphyletic, but we don't quite know yet. Anyway, so it includes your mayflies and your dragonflies and your damselflies, and they're the only extant or living groups that would be in this natural group of Plecoptera. So the first order is Ephemeroptera, and in Greek, Ephemeroptera just means short-lived winged, and that's because the adults of this group only live for a day. Like, they live in the river or aquatic habitat as a larva, and then they emerge for a day, and then they die. The end. Their common name are mayflies, and their characteristics are that they have aerostate antennae or staccaceous antennae, depending on which term you want to use. They have two pairs of wings, and at rest, they hold them over their back, and you have a really broad forewing and a really itty-bitty little hind wing. They have no mouth parts. Because they don't feed, because they only live for a day, and the males have elongated forelegs. It's unsure what they're used for, but it's probably used for grabbing females. Some of the mass emergences of these mayflies is just ridiculous. So the idea is that all of these organisms emerge at exactly the same time so they can mate, lay their eggs, and die, and they overwhelm the predator population. So it's really great because you can find your mate because there's 700 trillion of them flying around. And while you may get eaten, you all can't get eaten because there's not enough predators to deal with this crazy amount of your grouping that has appeared. In fact, in some areas, like in Mississippi, these mayfly emergences get so thick, and there's just so many of them that they actually have to plow. Like, they take snow plows and plow dead mayflies out of the street because people can't see, and there's car accidents, and they pile up in inches on the road, so they have to like plow them out of the way. And it's just crazy that many insects can just like emerge at exactly the same time, and it's kind of mind-boggling, but super cool, and that's why their name is Ephemeroptera. They only live for a day, short-lived wings. The next order is Odonata, and these are your damselflies and dragonflies. The Greek for Odonata is tooth, and that's because they're like these raised projections on the mandibles that kind of look tooth-like. Their characteristics are that they have a secondary sex organ on their thorax, and the males have the claspers, the CRC, that have been modified to grab females by the neck and drag them around and stuff. And damselflies and dragonflies have an aquatic nymphal stage, and one of their characteristics is they have this labial mask, which is this little part of their mouth that like unhooks and like comes out in front of them. And it's super cool because they can catch fish, and so they're insects that can reverse the food chain, which is awesome. Odonata has two major groupings, and the first is Anisoptera, and that's your dragonflies. Dragonflies are easily identifiable because they're really big and they're thick and they look really robust and they're really, really strong flyers. Dragonflies specifically have been studied by the military for like ever because dragonflies can see almost 360 degrees around them and move each wing independently, which gives them amazing maneuverability, and they can fly backwards, and they capture their prey in flight and then eat it in flight, and they mate in flight. They do everything while they're flying. They're only sitting down if they're tired or need to warm up. And so the military has been studying dragonflies for a long time to figure out how to make drones, and so we could send drones out to places and look at stuff. And recently some neurotechnology has come out where they like strap little backpacks onto the dragonflies, and so they could see like how quickly their brains are picking up sensory information as they were like flying around. And there's some really cool slow-mo videos that I've linked down in the description, so you should go look at them because they're super cool. The other suborder in the group Odonata is Zygoptera, which are your damselflies. Zygoptera in Greek just means same wing, and that's because damselflies' wings are the same size. The forewing and the hindwing are the same size. Damselflies also look not quite as good at flying. They're a little bit slower, they're a little bit skinnier, they're less robust than dragonflies are, and damselflies also hold their wings over their back at rest instead of straight out, except for the one family of spread-winged damselflies, which hold their wings out at rest, but they look very much like a damselfly and not very much like a dragonfly, so you shouldn't get confused anyway. When I was in Ecuador, I saw this crazy huge damselfly. It was like 7 inches. It was crazy. I didn't know they could get that big, and at first I thought it was a dragonfly, and then it landed and had his wings over its back at rest, and I realized how skinny it was. And I just didn't realize that damselflies could get that big. It is called the helicopter damselfly, and you could actually see each wing rotate individually. We're now in the unranked natural group Neoptera, which just means new wing in Greek, and this contains all the insects that can fold their wings over their back, so that is now all the insects that we're going to talk about. The first order in Neoptera is Plecoptera, and in Greek, Plecoptera just means braided or twisted wing, and that's because that's how they fold their wings over their back. Their common name are the stoneflies. They have an aquatic nymphal stage, which can be used as a macroinvertebrate to show and determine stream health. So if you have them there, then you have a good quality habitat. Some other characteristics are that they have 2 cerci on the end of their abdomen, they have filiform antennae, and their front wings are narrower than their hind wings, and a really, really great wing venation characteristic is they seem to have this braid in their wing venation. The next order is Phasmida. Sometimes they're called Phasmatodea. In Greek, Phasmida just means phantom, and this is because these are your walking sticks, stick insects, stick bugs, or leaf bugs, and so they all camouflage really, really well. You can rarely ever see them unless they're moving. They tend to have this ability to kind of like sway as if the wind is blowing, which works great if the wind is actually blowing, but gives them away if it's not. Their characteristics are that they often look stick-like or leaf-like, and some crazy ones in the tropics have these like little projections off of them that look like moss, and that's super cool. Lots of things can look like sticks, so if you find one, just be sure to check for those pronathous mouthparts or those mouthparts that face forward, and you won't be led astray. Walking sticks make great pets, but unfortunately there was like a slight problem in the US and you can't get them in the US anymore. But if you go to Europe or you end up teaching in Europe ever, they're great, great, great to have around because they can't bite anyone and they're really charismatic, and a lot of them are really big. So when I was in Australia, one of the tutors that we had was an entomologist, and she reared the Goliath stick insect, and it was just really cool to hold a bug that big. The next order is Mantodea, and these are your praying mantises. Mantodea in Greek just means the form of a prophet, and their characteristics are that they have the raptorial forelegs, a really triangular head with hyponathous mouthparts, and really big eyes. Mantas make great, great classroom pets. The adults live for about 6 months, so there's no long-term care. You just have to feed them a cricket like every 2 days, 2 to 3 days. They're really, really charismatic, so when you walk in the room, they look at you, and if you talk to them, they look at you, and it's just really, they're just like so cool to have around, and they remind me a lot of cats. They're kind of like aloof and sort of like, who are you and what are you doing? You can handle them really well. They don't really care about being handled. And if you get a female, they're kind of too big and clunky to fly very well. So about the only thing they can do is jump. They have this special pigment in their eyes, so when it gets dark, they release this pigment into their eye, and their eye turns completely black, and so they can hunt at night. But it's a really cool thing to observe if you're around kind of late at night and you see it. And praying mantises also reverse the food chain because they've been observed for catching hummingbirds on hummingbird feeders outside like people's houses. The next order is Blattodea, and these are your cockroaches. In Greek, Blattodea just means cockroach, and if you want like a super literal translation, then Blattodea is one that shuns away from light because the cockroaches like run away when you open the door and they hide in your cabinets and stuff. Their characteristics are that they have a flattened body that often looks leathery. Some of them have wings, some of them don't. The males typically have large cerci, and sometimes, depending on your species, they're asymmetric as well. Cockroaches are all from Africa, so although we have ones that are named the American cockroach and we have ones that are named the German cockroach, they didn't actually come from Germany or the Americas. They came from Africa, and they probably got here on the slave trade boats. One thing that's interesting about the German cockroach is that since there's so many of them in some places of the United States, like in New York, and because we keep using glucose-baited traps to try and kill them, some of them are actually becoming adverse to glucose. Like they have a genetic change that happens in their taste buds, so they no longer like how glucose tastes. So they're not avoiding the poison in the traps, they're actually just avoiding the bait that we're using instead. Although you may be certain that cockroaches' natural habitat is in your cabinets, they actually live under tree bark. And you can find a lot of natural wood cockroaches just by pulling apart old logs and hacking away at tree bark. They're flattened and have those really spiky running legs that aid them in climbing and navigating under the tree bark. Cockroaches make great classroom pets. So the Madagascar and hissing cockroaches are a good like 3 to 4 inches long, depending if you have a male or a female. They don't bite at all, and they hiss, which is kind of cool. So you can do all these kind of different activities with hissing cockroaches, or just have them in your classroom. You can pretty much just feed them dog food and give them a little bit of water, and then they'll just like reproduce and exist forever. So great classroom pet, and you can usually find them online, or sometimes pet stores will have them too. Termites are the only grouping that is not an order that get their own slide in this presentation, and that's because up until like last year, UJ was still teaching them as an order Isoptera, which no longer exists. We have now conformed and accepted all the data that shows that termites are just eusocial cockroaches. Isoptera in Greek meant same wing, and that's because if you had winged ones, their forewings and their hind wings looked exactly the same. But now they're in the superfamily Termitoidea, and it's probably a superfamily, although all the experts are still kind of arguing about where exactly these weird eusocial cockroaches belong in the phylogenetic tree. So this will probably change if you actually watch this video and it's not 2013 anymore. The characteristics of termites are that they're eusocial. The ones with wings, or the alates, have reduced wing venation. They're all kind of small and pale, and they have moniliform antennae. There is this one really cool study that came out that showed that in one species of termites, the soldiers would actually suicide bomb. And so termites usually have this kind of sticky secretion. Some of them have like caustic chemicals, but these guys have like this backpack of goo, and the older that the termite got, the more toxic and larger it got too. And so older termites would sacrifice themselves to save the younger termites, and they would like go over to the ants and just like explode and hurt all the ants, and so that gave the other termites time to like run away and hide and do termite-y stuff. The next order is Dermaptera, and in Greek, Dermaptera just means skin wing, and it's referring to the leathery texture of the insect. Earwig comes from an old wives' tale where they thought that the earwig would like drill through your ear and then like live in your brain. The characteristics are that the cerci are sexually dimorphic, so the males have the really big like pincery-like cerci, and the females have the more straight, long cerci. And oftentimes the wings are present, but not all earwigs have wings. But if they do have wings, then the leathery forewing is like really, really reduced into this like little stub at the top. And it covers most of the hind wing, which is also greatly reduced, and it has been reduced just into the anal or jugal lobe. We're now in the order Orthoptera, which are your grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets. In Greek, Orthoptera means straight-winged, which isn't all that helpful for helping to identify this group, but that's because Orthoptera used to include a whole bunch of things, including grasshoppers and cockroaches and mantises and a whole bunch of other things. It has been reduced into just this order now of the grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. Their characteristics are that they have hypognathous mouthparts, so the mouthparts that face downward. They also have these really big jumping legs, and they have a specialized joint to help them jump, and they make sound by rubbing their body parts together. Orthoptera contains two main suborders, and the first is Caelifera, which in Latin just means sky bear, and I'm pretty sure this is the group that contains locusts. So Caelifera includes locusts, grasshoppers, and lubbers, and the way that you can tell them apart from other things is that they tend to have really short antennae. Their ears are on their first abdominal segment, and they make sound by rubbing their legs together. The second suborder is Encephora, which in Latin means sword bearer, and that's because the females have these really long, giant ovipositors. So if you get a female and the ovipositor is noticeably large, then you definitely have an Encephoran. A couple other characteristics are that the ears are on the tibia of their forelegs, and they make sound by rubbing their wings together. And these guys include crickets and katydids. The next order that we're going to talk about is Thysanoptera, which are your lice, and in Greek, Thysanoptera just means wingless lice. The characteristics of lice are that they're wingless, they have reduced antennae, their head is sessile, and they tend to be ectoparasitic. And it's really crazy because some of them are really, really specific. So like the lice that get in your hair and the lice that are crabs are species specific, and your crabs cannot live on your head, and your head lice could not live where crabs do. And it isn't just that specific on us either. There are a lot of birds that have lice, and it's the same thing for them. Lice that live on one area of the bird cannot live on the area that other lice colonize on. And so there has actually been this kind of diversification and speciation based on where these lice can live on an organism. The next group is Thysanoptera, which in Greek just means bristlewing, and that's because their wings have been reduced into this little nub with these little feather projections off of it, and so they look bristly. In fact, the smaller you get, the more likely it is for you to develop wings that look like this. And there's a whole bunch of weird, kind of crazy groups that do this, like fairy flies, for example. Anyway, they're called Thysanoptera because their wings look bristly. Their common name are the thrips, and thrips is both singular and plural, just to mess with everyone. And their characteristics are those feathery wings if they have them, and they're generally long and tubular, and they're itty bitty and really, really tiny. Their claim to fame, despite being so tiny, is that they're actually a pretty decent crop pest because they transmit a lot of diseases. The next order is Hemiptera, and in Greek, Hemiptera just means half wing, and that's because this order used to be like 3 other orders, and Hemiptera is just referring to the group that had the half wings or the Hemiptera, but then since then they've all been kind of mushed into this order, and then there are suborders, and so this is kind of a remnant of what the order used to be. They contain the aphids, whiteflies, cicadas, leafhoppers, and your true bugs, which include things like your box elder bug and your wheel bug. This is one of the mega diverse orders, so I literally be here like all day saying all the things that this order contained. So I'm not going to do that, but there's a brief snippet of what it is. And their characteristics are that they all share the common hemipteran beak, that very specialized, modified mouthpart that is evolutionarily distinct to this group. And so a lot of hemipterans can look like Hemiptera has a bunch of suborders, but here are the 3 that are going to be most useful for you for identification. And the first is Sternorhyncha, which in Greek means chest beak, and that's because it looks like the hemipteran beak or the mouth parts are coming out of the chest of the insect. And this includes your aphids, whiteflies, and scale insects. The next suborder is Auchenorhyncha, and Auchenorhyncha just means neck beak, and that's because it looks like the mouth parts are coming out of the insect's neck. And this includes all of your plant hoppers, tree hoppers, leaf hoppers. If it's small, bug-like, and jumps, it's probably in this group. And it also includes your cicadas. The last suborder is Heteroptera, and Heteroptera in Greek just means different wing, and that's because this is the group with the Hemielytra. Heteroptera includes a whole bunch of things like all of your true bugs, your stink bugs, and your wheel bugs, and your box elder bugs, and a whole bunch of other bugs. This is a really, really diverse group, and there's a lot of beautiful organisms in here. The easiest way to tell these guys apart from everything else are the Hemielytra, and they have their mouth parts coming off the front of their mouth. This group is the group that you'd probably be most likely to confuse with beetles, because there are some families, there's Scutellaridae and Thyreochoridae, and they all look very, very beetle-like, and so you're definitely going to want to check for those antennae, and you're going to want to check for your mouth parts for anything that you find that may look beetle-y. And this concludes our section 2 on starting to identify different insect orders. The next time we're going to be talking about your hemipterans and then go all the way up to wasps. So that'll be part 3 and the final part of our groupings. I hope that you learned some cool facts about some organisms that you may or may not have already known about, and that you learned about some new ones.